Mena-Watch, der unabhängige Nahost-Think Tank.
Welcome to a new episode of Mena Talk. My name is Jasmin Arémi, an editor at Mena-Watch, and today we're speaking with Seyran Ateş, a lawyer, author, and women's rights activist who, like few others, stands for a liberal, enlightened Islam and the defense of women's rights. And that's exactly what we'll be talking about today. Seyran, it's great to have you here. We've agreed to be on a first-name basis for this conversation, and you were born in Istanbul, having lived in Berlin since your childhood. For a long time, you practiced as a lawyer in family and criminal law, and accordingly, for decades, you've been a dedicated advocate for women and female migrants. Which experiences contributed the most to shaping you into the renowned women's rights activist you are recognized as today?
Well, dear Jasmin, first of all, thank you so very much for this wonderful opportunity to speak with you now and for the kind invitation. Well, what exactly shaped me into the person I am today? Certainly personal experiences and decisions made throughout my life, which actually began early in my childhood. For instance, even as a very young child, daughter of a Turkish mother, Kurdish father, being the sister of 3 brothers and 1 sister, I very quickly recognized that we were growing up and living within profoundly patriarchal structures. These conditions ultimately influenced me so deeply that I started to resist, determined not to continue living in that manner and refusing to accept it as my fate. So, as a child, I recognized this very early on. As a teenager, I started to rebel even more. Then, not yet 18, just 3 months before my legal majority, I ran away from home because I absolutely refused to live under those patriarchal conditions. And so I became a feminist quite early on in my life.
Because of your stance in the public eye, you've endured severe threats and intimidation, even going so far as to relinquish your license to practice law. But you never stopped being politically active. So, how did that come about? Would you mind briefly sharing some of the background with us?
Yes, I'd absolutely love to share that. It was in 2006 when, due to the intense threats and the pressures I experienced, I actually surrendered my license and had to close my law practice. That was a truly dramatic period. The reason behind it was that back in 2003, I began advocating for forced marriage to be recognized as its own distinct criminal offense. I then spent 3 whole years steadfastly defending and elaborating on my efforts to establish that specific law. And unfortunately, during that time, I was heavily attacked from many sides, insulted, threatened, and within that discussion also very much, criticized very below the belt by many different factions. From Turkey, via Turkish media, but also from the Left Green Party and Social Democrats, who criticized me, claiming I was criminalizing migrants, that I was Islamophobic, and so on and so forth. However, after 3 years, this situation truly escalated to a dimension where I felt I simply couldn't endure it any longer. And it was precisely during this period that I was also assaulted by the husband of a client, right after a divorce hearing in family court. And that, in the end, truly became the straw that broke the camel's back for me, the incident that finally pushed me over the edge. Mentally and physically drained, I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm also quitting my work as a lawyer. I give up, because none of it really made any sense to me anymore. However, during that very time, in 2006, the Berlin State Criminal Police Office actually offered me personal protection. After some time, I then resumed my political activism and my career as an author. But ever since then, since 2006, I haven't really been able to work as a lawyer. I simply cannot open an office with my name displayed prominently outside because individuals will consistently arrive intending to...
And you still need personal protection, if I've been following correctly.
Yes, I've actually been living since 2006. Sometimes more, sometimes less strictly, under personal protection. I mean continuously under protection, but the threat levels have changed from time to time. That truly hinged on whether I was very active or whether I had retreated. And especially after my book, Islam Needs a Sexual Revolution, which I wrote and was published in 2009. I completely withdrew for 2 years because after that book was published, the threats intensified even more, and I simply couldn't handle the mental strain of it all. And now I can definitely say that since 2017, I've once again been in an escalated threat situation, simply because I opened the mosque in 2017. This, in turn, meant that my efforts were thoroughly and consistently channeled into the mosque's work. But at the same time, the threat level rose again. So at the end of the day, I can tell you, I really don't know what to do anymore, even when I pull back. People just won't leave me in peace. For 2 years, I was managing properties, and I really didn't want to deal with all these issues anymore, much like Konstantin Schreiber chose to do. Yeah, he was the one who said, I'm not doing anything more with Islam, and now he's back again. Luckily, thank God, it was the same for me. I said, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. But people didn't stop threatening me. They actually told me, yeah, we're still going to cut out your tongue if you say anything about Erdogan, even though I hadn't uttered a single word about him anymore. Yes, unfortunately, these individuals possess a very specific agenda. And as you're well aware, particularly in the case of Salman Rushdie, they also have a very long, persistent memory. And it's gotten to the point where they'll even wait for the person who will carry out the attack, someone who hasn't even been born yet. So it's really a very difficult situation for people like us.
Perhaps you could briefly share with our listeners what your professional day-to-day life entails at this very moment, could you? So we already know you're definitely an author. You've opened a mosque. Just for context, for background, what are you doing at the moment?
Yes, my professional situation at the moment is that I am the managing director of the Ibn Rushd Goethe Mosque, and I run the mosque there, but I also serve as an imam from time to time. That means I preach and also provide theological guidance for this mosque. And then, I also am involved in various projects, always actively involved in various mosque projects. Then I am the managing director and founder of the Mena-Watch Discourse Educational and Social Welfare Association. Currently, we have a truly wonderful project called the Democracy Mobile, and I'm one of its co-project leaders. Well, I'm the project leader, and I have a co-project leader. With it, we do educational work, democracy education in facilities for kids and youth and schools. And yes, alongside all of that, we've also recently launched our acceptance campaign, which is titled Diversity in Islam. This is a project that truly connects both organizations, both NGOs, the educational institution, and the mosque itself. As an author, I also travel a great deal. I still conduct readings and deliver lectures. Just yesterday, in fact, I was at another event right here near Berlin, in Templin, and after we watched a film, the film Girls and Gods, which was about women in various religions, I then participated in the panel discussion. Yes, panels and discussions like those, I still participate in them to this day. So that's what my professional life looks like at the moment. But let's return to the topic of being a jurist and a lawyer. It's not as if I've entirely given up that part of myself which I very, very much love and cherish. I regularly provide counseling services at a women's cafe located in Berlin-Neukölln. This means I provide a type of legal consultation, not as a licensed attorney myself, but I do advise women regarding their legal inquiries. I clarify their specific situations and subsequently recommend which lawyer or what particular legal specialization they should or indeed must consult concerning their specific case. So what that means is I'm still doing that work at the grassroots level. So I know how people at the grassroots level are doing.
But that's also an excellent segue. The main reason we invited you here today is primarily the issue of gender apartheid, specifically in the context of Iran and Afghanistan. We had already briefly touched upon this beforehand. Could you please take a moment to explain what the term gender apartheid signifies, particularly within the context of Islamist circles in Europe? How is this term defined so people can get an idea of what it means?
Yes, we use the term gender apartheid to describe a situation where certain individuals first and foremost divide society in a binary way into men and women. because for them it's about male and female, so that in their minds only these two genders actually exist, and that these two genders each have a right to exist within their own designated and assigned worlds, purely based on their gender. This means that men are assigned a particular public sphere, a specific way of life, and a designated space for their existence. That is the space in the public sphere. It's the space that also has an active outward effect. And women, on the other hand, are allocated the closed, controlled interior space. You can genuinely divide it into separate, distinct rooms. That's one thing, that men inherently have the right to be active and to operate within society, and indeed to fully experience and enjoy the freedoms that a public sphere naturally entails. And women, as is quite evident in Afghanistan and especially in Iran right now, are expected to be veiled, covered in public, not perceived publicly at all, and banished to their indoor spaces. They are exiled and confined to their homes without any public presence or recognition. And that is, first and foremost, physically speaking, the description for gender apartheid. And then it's about how gender roles are assigned and how individuals perceive themselves, whether as men or as women. Women are considered subordinate to men. They face discrimination and are not permitted to pursue all professions. It is a profoundly patriarchal, very archaic patriarchal societal structure where power from the top through men cascades down to women, not merely discriminating against and oppressing them, but also dictating who is granted the right to exist, and beyond just how they dress, but also who they marry, and above all, how decisions are made about their bodies. And it's very, very important that women are essentially denied human dignity and human rights, specifically universal human rights. They are not entitled to them, and spaces are deliberately designed, or when men and women interact, environments are established to ensure the genders remain absolutely separated. Thus, women are seated in one room, while men are placed in another. This is very often true in private spaces or in cafes, restaurants, and certainly in public areas. When there are celebrations like weddings, well, anniversaries are seldom celebrated among these people, but weddings, then we're dealing with gender segregation there. Schools and various other establishments also ensure men and women are separated, not seated together, and don't travel in the same subway compartment, just as we've witnessed in Iran. Yes, and so on and so forth.
So what are the central mechanisms of gender apartheid that can really be seen in the Islamic Republic of Iran? So how has that developed in recent years, especially since the woman life freedom movement?
Well, Iran is actually one of the worst examples where we can clearly see the devastating consequences of gender apartheid. Women are absolutely banished from active public life, forced under a black chador, and primarily restricted in their individual personal development and growth. This means their capabilities are hindered right from the start. They aren't allowed to dress how they want. They can't pursue careers they desire, even if they have studied for them. And as a result, we're dealing with social life, cultural life, and even economic life where male power, so to speak, is always the only thing that becomes visible and constantly reveals its presence. Women are not permitted to become singers or actresses, nor are they allowed to act in accordance with such professions. Therefore, these are indeed circumstances that many Western countries can no longer really imagine because such conditions are not. It transports people back to the Middle Ages, where even in other nations women were not permitted on stage or allowed to perform vocally, as their voices would purportedly entice men, essentially sexualizing them. And that is indeed the core motivation and simultaneously the central issue we face with gender apartheid. It's the explicit and complete sexualization of women through their bodies, reducing them solely to physical beings. This means women are viewed as mere sexual objects, specifically intended to perturb men, to sexually incite men so intensely, and to sexually stimulate men so powerfully that they cannot concentrate on their religion, their business, nor even their very lives.
Should the central role of the headscarf system also be mentioned here? Are women explicitly veiled for that reason, or are there even more underlying factors at play?
Well, if you consider the practice of veiling or the headscarf, what's often termed headscarf Islam, then we understand that at the very inception of Islam, in its foundational history, Muslim women, the believing women, were explicitly instructed that they were permitted to cover themselves. They were to be protected. They should cover themselves for their own protection, in contrast to the non-free women, such as enslaved individuals, prostitutes, and sex workers, who were expected to be easily recognizable and visible. Identifiable, and they become identifiable by covering themselves, concealing their modesty, and veiling themselves. And at the same time, it was thereby expressed that women who do not veil and cover themselves are in fact sexually available, clearly signaling their accessibility. This meant that any woman not wearing a veil could almost be raped or at least sexually harassed by men right there on the open street. That was not an issue at all. So we're now applying this principle to the 21st century, also applied to Iran. Women are explicitly told this, and this is the singular motivation for women to wear headscarves. Others can interpret as much as they want into it, and in these hijabin videos on Instagram, the influencers can celebrate themselves as much as they want for their freedom under the headscarf. The sole motive for the headscarf is tied to the perception of women as sexual objects and men needing protection from being provoked by women. And that is why the headscarf there in Iran, or the topic of the headscarf in Iran, is so very important, and also for us in the rest of the world, it's crucial to look closely at it. What happens when a society sexualizes all women and forces them to cover themselves? Then we remain trapped by this image, the perception that women's bodies are completely sexualized, and men supposedly have no way to free themselves from this primal urge. This implies that they are allowed to rape, grope, or assault any woman not wearing a veil, because the woman herself is seen as fair game and is therefore fair to be assaulted, has to allow it, because she is then an unfree woman, a woman who is considered to be fair game.
Sexual violence also plays a role in Iran against women in prisons, even against underage women. It's also a kind of political pressure tactic that is used.
Well, we are aware that the legal age for marriage in Iran, to my understanding, is just 9 years old. This means that, officially, children can be married off, starting from the tender age of 9. So it is truly a perverse situation that exists there, allowing men to marry children, and an entire society is founded upon the idea that women, from the onset of menstruation, or indeed from the tender age of 9 years, are deemed eligible for marriage and sexual use through which violence is exerted. It's certified, you are now a woman, and a man may marry you, a man may use you sexually, and violence is exerted through that sexuality. Yes, and the sexualized violence does not diminish in the slightest just because women are veiled. That's another aspect we see in Iran. Iranian women can also attest to the fact that veiling does not and has not automatically led to a decrease in sexual harassment or rape in Iran or Afghanistan or even in other Islamic countries. In fact, quite the opposite has been observed, with an increase in such incidents. Because sexuality is taboo, and as a result, most men just don't have any opportunities or chances to engage in normal sexual relationships, to enter into a normal relationship between the sexes. This implies that as teenagers, falling in love and gaining experiences, or even as young adults, accumulating experiences and fostering a normal interaction with the opposite sex is crucial. None of that can happen when I practice this gender apartheid, when I separate the genders so completely that they can't find any relaxed, normal way of interacting with each other. The topic of a certain kind of modesty is always there. I apologize for interrupting, but it's always the same argument that women are supposed to dress modestly, that they are supposed to dress humbly and reservedly, you know. That's all just a pretext. So what exactly does modesty even mean in this case then? It means that women are completely veiled even in the middle of summer, and that they can barely get enough air to breathe. But supposedly modesty is protected by this means. But no, quite the opposite. The woman is in fact the female gender. Overall, women as an entire societal group are inherently sexualized by the very act of being veiled and marked in such a way.
So, if we now look at the fact that the headscarf is actually more of a political symbol and not primarily a religious practice, how do you perceive all these Western debates that often take place here in the West? The headscarf, or the hijab, as you just mentioned, is often celebrated as a symbol of empowerment. There are influencers who promote it on the internet, on TikTok. And you often get the feeling that if you criticize it, you're immediately labeled as Islamophobic, even though it might be more about Islamism in reality.
So you can surely imagine that it's just horrific for me to have to listen to all of this, because at the end of the day, for me, this is a betrayal of the women's movement in Islamic countries as well. It's a betrayal of women's solidarity generally, because Western women have claimed and continue to assert their right to liberate themselves from the restrictive dress codes that were once imposed upon them. One simply needs to Google and ask oneself, what was women's fashion like in Europe, in Western countries during the 19th and 20th centuries? Women have truly liberated themselves from corsets, from long dresses, from hats on their heads, and even from the veiling aspect of the headscarf. You see, this isn't some Islamic invention. It's a pre-Islamic dress code, specifically put in place to control women, to control their bodies, their very essence. Jewish women, Christian women have worn it, and they continue to do so to this day. And so, in that regard, it's not a religious rule at all, but rather a societal regulation that back in the 7th century specifically categorized people into free and unfree women, encompassing all individuals. And moreover, to further elaborate, Islam inherently lacks any form of symbolism. This implies there are truly no symbols within the religion itself, therefore this cannot possibly be a religious symbol. So no, this is certainly not about belonging to Islam. Western women, even feminists, explain all this to us, and I'm utterly dismayed and often enraged that I frequently encounter atheists, leftists, liberals, and even Greens who presume to explain Islam and my own faith to me, constantly attempting to impress upon me the idea that I should simply understand that. So much freedom is supposedly found in or beneath the headscarf, and that it represents significant empowerment, and that these women are strong, remarkable individuals studying law, medicine, working as journalists and IT experts, and excelling in math and physics, among other fields. However, it doesn't sway me in the slightest. Not only does it fail to persuade me, but it also vexes and genuinely infuriates me. This is because it's simply assumed that any woman who, out of reactionary impulse, adheres to a dress code is simultaneously deemed foolish. Thus, these very individuals are inherently racist or rather Islamophobic despite their continuous accusations leveled against me. So what's completely absurd is that I'm accused of being Islamophobic when I speak out against these hijab movements. And the multitude of Western, liberal, feminist women who partake in and champion this headscarf Islam, as I've stated, completely overlook their own past and deny us our crucial battle against the sexualization of our bodies because we as Muslims either don't acknowledge or even begrudge Muslim women their fight for freedom. So they're not supporting the fight for freedom waged by Iranian women, for example, the Persian women's movement, Woman, Life, Freedom. Instead, when all is said and done, what they're actually supporting is headscarf Islam, the Islam of the hijab. And they celebrate it as liberation, while completely ignoring, even totally blocking out, the harsh reality that in Iran, women are being killed, subjected to rape in prisons, and treated with unimaginable brutality simply because they refuse to wear the headscarf. So I haven't observed a robust feminist left-leaning movement here demonstrating such intense commitment to the struggles of these women as they currently do for the headscarf issue. We're actually seeing that right now with the Green Party and their extensive 24-point package. They've come up with something that is also along those lines. nice-sounding things such as we wish to support Imam education, a liberal Islam, and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's all just for show. These are all merely specious arguments. Their main issue, the absolute core of their demand, is to have women wearing headscarves represented in all sectors of society. As teachers, as police officers, as lawyers, that's their foremost interest, what they desperately want to enforce. And they're packaging this now in a pseudo-liberal, enlightened framework, an ideology of Islam and diversity, which is simply a blatant lie. It's a mere pretext. These are all just convenient excuses. I declare this, I assert this, because if one observes the history of the Green Party and their conduct over the past 2 decades, they could have championed diversity within Islam a long time ago. That includes female teachers not wearing headscarves, Muslims drinking alcohol, and gay and lesbian Muslims. And part of that also means that a Muslim woman can marry a non-Muslim man and still find happiness together. The Green Party could have put all these issues on the agenda a long time ago. They could have placed them on the daily order, but they just didn't do it. Now, just as they're passionately advocating for those wearing the hijab, they suddenly present us with this 24-point package. Well, all I can say, to put it very casually, after the good comes the bad, right? There's a clear agenda.
Also, when one considers the woman life freedom movement in Iran, it really seems quite presumptuous to claim that the headscarf represents freedom here. Women are out on the streets there, who are quite literally being shot and abducted. So where exactly does this movement stand at this very moment, particularly in light of the recent protests that were met with suppression?
If you consider these women in Iran and also the men who are fighting so that their wives no longer have to be veiled. Of course, it's also true that there's always this group of Orthodox women who advocate for and fight for veiling. Therefore, all these hijab-wearing influencers, and particularly the Green Party, should now clearly and definitively position themselves on this issue. When they look at Iran, they truly grasp the fundamental idea behind the headscarf, and they clearly see the specific women, the particular kind, indeed the very ideology that truly underpins and drives the wearing of this headscarf. And you, when you support the headscarf here, it becomes quite clear which side you are supporting in this matter. In that respect, Iran truly serves as a crucial litmus test and a compelling illustration of the robust support for woman life freedom that is genuinely originating from the Western world and the woman life freedom movement itself. This has led, among other things, to the fact that since January, specifically starting from January, the umpteenth revolutionary attempt against the mullahs occurred, and now we are currently experiencing this ongoing war. Where does the movement stand now? It stands, whether they're sitting or not. They are desperately at home, hoping for their liberation from the rest of the world. So essentially, in this situation, I would expect us not to be promoting the headscarf and the hijab, but rather quite the opposite, to stand in solidarity, shoulder to shoulder, with those who are striving to ensure that human rights are universal, and for Iran to be freed, serving as a prime example from the imposition of, from the compulsion to wear a veil, and that the fight for the headscarf for female teachers, police officers, and judges, even right here in Germany, absolutely must come to an end. Instead, it should also be viewed as a symbol of oppression, and we should state, okay, women who are deeply religious who absolutely wish to be so. Orthodox religious individuals are free to practice their faith privately. However, such practices should not be displayed in public spaces where the state is represented. The state takes a position there, whether it intends to or not, simply by allowing it.
Which mechanisms are we actually reproducing when we permit this to occur in the public realm and within this specific framework? So for one thing, we are definitely not supporting the Iranian women's movement and also not Muslim women in Europe.
Thus, by virtue of how the West often engages with hijabis and headscarf Islam, it inadvertently underpins patriarchal structures, archaic patriarchal structures who views women as inferior beings devoid of value. Thus, the women wearing hijabs can apply all the makeup they want and present themselves as perfectly as they please on social media, and they can study as much as they like. Ultimately, they embrace the patriarchal mentality, specifically the idea that a woman's entire physical existence is nothing more than a sexual object serving exclusively for a man's pleasure and gratification. And that is continuously reproduced there. Over and over again, it's asserted, yes, but, it's about modesty. And by stating, yes, but it is their own free decision and it is their religion, they are deliberately lying. Thus, there is a very deliberate lie being told that it's solely a matter of religious conviction, and therefore one simply accepts their free will without any further discussion or inquiry. I label it a lie precisely because it suppresses and outright denies the underlying motive, the very reason why individuals within this Muslim community or within Islam believe that a woman absolutely must be veiled. This is a deliberate concealment of the true intentions behind such practices. This motive is suppressed and it is veiled from public view. One could make a clever play on words there. They obscure the truth and then they deny the underlying motivation. Therefore, this 24-point package also serves as a deliberate obfuscation of the Green Party's true motives. They want to support an Islam that condones the headscarf.
Another important example can be found right now in Afghanistan. Ever since the Taliban took over the government, gender apartheid has truly been elevated to an entirely different and much more severe level. How precisely would you describe the current situation for women living under the Taliban?
Yes, specifically Afghanistan and Pakistan are currently the two countries, and I do look at many other Islamic nations, of course, but these two particular countries deeply move me emotionally to an extreme extent. So whenever I see a particular post or a report, which is almost daily, I just cry. I really can't. I'm always close to tears. I can barely stand it. It's simply unbearable what's currently unfolding in Afghanistan, what the Taliban have inflicted upon the people there. The very first thing they did was indeed to put women under the burqa, introducing a burqa mandate, and to keep women from education, to keep young girls from education. And that precisely should make it unequivocally clear to everyone in the West that the veiling of women is driven by a very particular political ideology, namely that the total system of male domination embodies an ideology of absolute control, indeed a totalitarian system of governance. Domination, a totalitarian system of rule, and in that sense religion is a political system for these people. So they present religion as a facade, but what we're truly dealing with here is a political Islam that is utterly devoid of spirituality. It bears no resemblance to religion as a conviction that fosters peace or as a guiding principle for peace. Instead, it operates purely as a political system, completely removed from any spiritual essence.
So where precisely do the systems of these Islamist regimes, such as the one in Iran and the one under the Taliban, intersect and share common ground? Perhaps all these nuances, these subtleties you're currently describing, could be clarified or indeed explained more effectively through that, or even made more apparent.
Even if the Taliban in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan and the Shiites in Iran accept vastly different interpretations, practices and traditions of Islam, they fundamentally clash and don't recognize each other as fellow Muslims, failing to mutually acknowledge one another as legitimate adherents of the faith. Indeed, we observe all these intense conflicts spanning from Morocco to Indonesia, arising from the myriad different legal schools, interpretations, various exegeses, and at times even individual sects within Islam. This leads to Muslims tragically killing fellow Muslims, all based on differing interpretations of their faith. So theologically or ideologically, we experience many very fine and subtle differences. However, when it comes to clarifying gender relations, and this becomes quite evident when it's about oppressing women, discriminating against them, and making them vanish from life, everyone agrees. How does one achieve that? I control women's bodies. I keep them veiled and I deprive them of education. She is not permitted to have economic independence. We make the decisions about who and when she marries. And we decide whether she has children or not. So that's the orthodoxy that we also know from other religions, just to emphasize that point. We are frequently accused of totally demonizing Islam, overlooking the fact that other religions also exhibit similar levels of discrimination and oppression against women. Far from it. We are well aware of that. And precisely because we know this and are fighting to be recognized for our diversity within Islam, I find myself in despair over the stance of so many feminists. So just look at how, in the so-called Western countries, people really struggled and fought for women to liberate themselves from religious decrees, from religious dictates, and from religious modesty, They liberated themselves from orthodoxy, from the doctrines of the Catholic Church, from Protestants, and even from Orthodox Jews. They liberated themselves from the constraints imposed by the majority of patriarchally structured religious ideologies, rejoicing in secularity, in laicism. They find joy in the Enlightenment, celebrating their newfound freedom and independence. Yet, the moment the conversation turns to Islam, all these remarkable achievements of the Enlightenment, the civil liberation movement, and the women's rights movement are completely disregarded. It is also completely overlooked and utterly ignored that women's rights activists throughout the entire Islamic world are enduring the very same struggle that women's rights activists have faced and continue to contend with in the rest of the world. No matter the religion, no matter the culture, we are dealing with the same fundamental issues. It's about freedom and individual self-determination, about the dignity of the individual.
So how would you then describe the role played by Western governments, particularly when it concerns women in Afghanistan or Iran? So, is this issue truly being taken seriously, or is it something that we in politics tend to avoid discussing altogether?
In politics, there's hardly any discussion about what agenda is being pursued, what idea is truly being followed. What did they actually want in Afghanistan? It was always said and claimed that they wanted to liberate women, and now we see that women are much worse off than when the Allies were there. And right now, currently in Iran, it's exactly the same. It's about liberating the people there. Western policy has for nearly 50 years, or rather more than 50 years, even predating the so-called Islamic Revolution, been engaged with Iran. And honestly, that term alone, Islamic Revolution, is inherently flawed, Thus, to me, in my mind, the Islamic Revolution is wrong, yes. Even before that, Western nations regrettably failed to contribute much, and they didn't strongly advocate for human rights in their collaborations with these countries, nor did they insist on certain standards being met when doing business with one another. Or to have intervened promptly when they recognized that their own populace was being brutally massacred and severely mistreated at the very lowest and most fundamental level. Consequently, Western nations simply averted their gaze, prioritizing their underlying economic interests above all else. And currently I'm basically saying the same thing about the war. I am profoundly grateful to both the US and Israel for initiating this conflict, despite the fact that their underlying motives are likely quite different, undeniably so, and they are pursuing altogether distinct goals. As a women's rights and human rights activist, and as a person who stands in solidarity with the women and men in Iran and Afghanistan, my hope is that they will finally achieve the same freedoms that we are so fortunate to enjoy here. It's not exclusively a Western patent. Therefore, I sincerely hope that these people will finally be liberated from this reign of terror and from all this brutality and violence. If that regime weren't present, we would witness a truly magnificent region in the Middle East. And Western countries have been enabling this for decades. They are part of the problem, and I truly hope that now and in the future they will become more a part of the solution. But so far they have always been part of the problem. They accepted it and put up with it.
How would you assess the current deportation policy, especially regarding Afghanistan?
I don't think that what we see in the media truly reflects everything that's really happening. So I truly don't get the impression that the deportation policy is actually working the way we're being promised. And I truly believe that Germany is completely incapable of genuinely identifying the radicals and extremists among them. Meanwhile, especially the Afghans who came as unaccompanied minors and are radicalizing in schools as an educational institution, we experience this firsthand, are not even on the political agenda yet. They've learned German here, are graduating, or have even been in apprenticeships and are now working diligently, yet their ideology is entirely aligned with Taliban-led Afghanistan. They participate in demonstrations advocating for a caliphate and Sharia law. I just feel like our government doesn't have a handle on this at all. Absolutely not. They are well-intentioned sentiments frequently reiterated in Sunday speeches and similar contributions, but never truly put into practice.
Right. Doesn't this also endanger Afghan women who are here seeking protection?
It endangers Afghan women. It endangers Afghan men who want to live in a democracy and a free society. And we are well aware of this from refugee accommodations. We know this from the first-hand accounts of the women and men who are unfortunately confronted by these extremists in the facilities. We are aware of the conflicts that exist there. We know that incidents repeatedly occur where these radical Afghans, along with other Islamists from various countries, target Muslim individuals, accusing them of not being true Muslims, demanding that they cease their rapprochement with the West, and insisting that they don headscarves. So there are reports from Syrian and Afghan women who don't wear the headscarf and took it off here, and now they face accusations about why they aren't veiled. That, for example, is also something that's missing from the public debate, that Muslim women specifically, who never wore headscarves in their home countries, whether it was Syria or even pre-Taliban Afghanistan, are now suddenly being compelled here in Germany to veil themselves, and this entire pro-headscarf Islamic movement completely ignores this critical issue. That suddenly, here in a free society in Germany, you're confronted with even more radicalism and Islamism than was the case in your home country.
Now, if we were to look again at feminism, at the feminist movement specifically, there's always a persistent insistence that one naturally desires to express solidarity with women in places like Iran and Afghanistan. However, people very often have some fears about expressing themselves in an anti-Muslim or racist way. Perhaps you could also offer some advice on how one can truly determine that they aren't acting in a racist manner. So perhaps you could elaborate a little. What precisely constitutes anti-Muslim racism, and what exactly does solidarity with women in Iran and Afghanistan entail?
First of all, I want to tell you that I don't accept that term. I don't use it either. There's Muslim hostility, Islam hostility, but anti-Muslim racism makes no sense to me logically because my religion is not a race. Right? So what then is the race of Islam? Is it black? Is it white? Does it have big eyes or little eyes or almond-shaped eyes? Is the hair, what color is it? The physiognomy of the Muslim? So what race is that supposed to be exactly? And equating animosity toward a religion or the anti-Islam sentiments of certain individuals with the hatred directed at an entire race, well, that. In my view, it simply doesn't lead us down the right path, neither in terms of terminology nor content. It really doesn't get us to where we need to be, which is a significant problem. I think just like Islamophobia, another word has been created here, a word specifically designed to kill and prevent any form of criticism. When even a person like myself, who opened a liberal mosque and has been leading it for 9 years, is labeled as Islamophobic or racist, then it becomes clear just how far this debate has fallen, and frankly, it's been this way for quite some time now. And I can only say it truly can't get any more absurd than this. That's precisely why I just advise everyone simply to reflect on their own inner compass and ask themselves this very question: what truly are my underlying motives for doing something? That's what matters to me. And I can really only give this advice. When it comes to freedoms, including freedom of religion, let's just look at the basic law. Freedom of religion means positive and negative freedom of religion, and then you can test whether these people who are being supported with their headscarf Islam and their orthodoxy actually accept the religious freedom of others themselves. For example, I'm affected by precisely these people who are constantly taking to the streets and shouting, Islam is freedom, Islam is this and that, and also this anti-Muslim racism narrative, a narrative that is aggressively being pushed forward. These are all individuals who currently reject our mosque or the very way in which liberal Muslims choose to live their lives. This means they don't accept freedom of religion within their own Muslim community, they label others as non-Muslims and infidels, and they don't accept people who don't believe in God at all. Also, as unbelievers, they're saying these people just have no right to exist, So we have a much more complex problem, and that's how I assess it, or how I argue. And we should be having these debates much, much more. We've now launched with the Educational Center and the mosque and acceptance campaign called Diversity in Islam. And it's very interesting. All that I've just described we see as reactions on social media. So we're essentially performing a litmus test right now, and it's clear that the images we're disseminating showing that Muslims can certainly consume alcohol, enter interfaith marriages, a female teacher may opt not to wear a headscarf, and a gay couple can genuinely find happiness as Muslims, yes, truly happy in their Muslim identity. We receive reactions to this diversity, such as, that simply doesn't exist, it's absolutely forbidden. Islam doesn't allow that. So, this sheer vehemence emanating from the ideologues and political Islam should, in my humble opinion, really open the eyes of all these misguided and deluded individuals, making them truly see that they are actually endorsing reactionary people and expressing solidarity. Practicing with political Islam and an Islamism that refuses to accept our open civil society, the rule of law, or our democracy. In that respect, my heartfelt advice truly is, begin with Article 1, human dignity is inviolable. And then I would say, as long as there is even one woman, one man, or one person on this earth, regardless of their gender identity, who is discriminated against by other individuals, and oppressed because human rights apply to everyone, as does basic law. It doesn't come from a tribal culture, nor is it tribal law. As long as that remains the case, I will consistently express my solidarity with those who bravely oppose the headscarf, who stand firm against the religious traditions and practices that infringe upon our fundamental freedoms. That's my heartfelt advice to everyone else out there. Simply stand firm in your convictions and never let anyone accuse you of being a racist or an enemy of Islam. Just because others say you are, that doesn't mean you actually are.
Yes, many thanks for that very clear classification, also regarding the terminology. Thank you ever so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd greatly appreciate it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel. Activate the bell, share this on social media, and find more analysis and discussion regularly on Mena-Watch. I'm Jasmin Arémi. Until the next Mena Talk.
Mena-Watch, der unabhängige Nahost-Think Tank. Besuchen Sie auch unsere Website. Dort finden Sie täglich neue aktuelle Berichte und ausführliche wissenschaftlich fundierte Hintergrundanalysen zur Geschichte und Gegenwart der MENA-Region.